بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين.
In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, prayers be upon the Prophet Muhammad. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to Doha, represented by this reputable center, Dr. Marwan, the godfather of these sessions. Each year we have new sessions and we are happy to raise the awareness because we are in a region that is changeable with many challenges looming and that require follow-up and analysis and monitoring. The best spaces to discuss these requirements are such meetings where experts meet in a comfortable environment, spontaneous environment as well. So our main theme is China with its changeable variables. I thank Dr. Marwan for giving me the opportunity to chair this panel discussion and the opportunity to discuss my paper that I have prepared. My paper discussed potential risks. So we have the Chinese presence in this region, not just in our region, but also in Africa and Iran. And I had commented about Dr. Weishig's speech when he said that this diplomatic penetration, this is a diplomatic penetration, and also a political decision, we do not own it to some extent and we do not make it to some extent. And so we are dealing with the reality. The reality is that China has a presence indeed. Since it has a presence, then we need as elites to think outside the box and to contemplate the realistic variables that we have. So when I prepared my paper, I entitled it with an implicit subject line, which is the great danger of China. For concerned that I have shed light on, I spent 2 months writing this paper and 35 pages. I relied on previous studies conducted by researchers and specialized research centers. I had done a comprehensive academic survey of what we have on the arena, and I chose the studies that I found to be more suitable for my perspective. I took the results based on the structure that I had constructed in my mind for this file and for this route of my study. I talked about three main issues, one of which I will be talking about, which is the Chinese security presence in Africa and its repercussions right now. We are not talking about the future, we're talking about the present. And I have mentioned a study on the security repercussions of the Chinese presence in Africa. And this necessitates that we learn from lesson also. Chinese presence in Central Asia after the Soviet Union. When these countries took their independence early 90s, we had Central Asia like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. So these countries acquired their independence consecutively, and they had their a loss of identity, constitutional identity, because they were affiliated with the Soviet Union. Suddenly, they were in the international scene without any constitutional organization. The scene was led by the Secretariat of the communist parties in each of these states. They became the heads of these states. China, the great neighbor of these countries, they had demands and they exploited the non constitutional transitional phase in these states in its early years. As Dr. Abdullah Shaigi said, these countries. Were dumped or overwhelmed with money, even though these states are rich. Kazakhstan has lots of minerals, metals, and oil. It has agricultural lands, 1.4 million acres of agricultural lands. So, as they say, it's a rich country, and yet they gave it money in debt, so they were over debted, and this money did not go to development, and China did not forgive them in one USD. They give you the service of debt and so on, but through these debts they were able to appropriate lands from these countries, and they appropriated also resources from these countries. This is what is happening right now in Africa as well, and might happen to us. Some people said with Dr. Muhammad and Dr. Abdullah, we are rich people and we don't know that, but this is a partial look, as only the projects that we are working with China on has astronomical numbers. And sometimes wouldn't have stability in our cash flow. We will reach a point where China will appropriate things in return for these cash flows. Especially in the BRI initiative, the most important point, and the military colleagues know about, are well aware of this. It's what is so-called high seas. The high seas is a military term. Let me talk to you about it because it's very important. It's 2 miles of the regional borders of countries. In the infographic, international protection of high seas only covers 1% of high seas in the world. This is international protection. The international plan is to protect 30% of that by 2030. So, what is happening on a Chinese level in high seas? In 1980, the average consumption of Chinese individuals of fish is 5 kilos. 2015, that was 41 kilo. In 85, boats, a high number of boats were turned into fishing boats, and we are talking about 20 million tons of fish yearly in high seas. And 1923, the number increased into 65,000 tons a year, 1,600 boats that were not announced or were not acknowledged. And I shall provide you with this infographic, and so that you can know that China is taking military action to protect its interests. So we are looking as China as a challenge, not a threat, a challenge. And we have the security experience in Africa, and we have the experience in high seas where we do not have control. And China has a great strategy to exploit and drain these high seas. These are challenges, and we have a study that we entitled the silent strategy. The silent strategy, which deals with the challenges and risks that are not seen. And we talked about 15 million from India in the region. These are among the silent challenges. I shall pause here just not to take all the time in this session. Today, our session is about the BRI. We will have a discussion. We have experts to talk about this in this regard. We start with Mr. Shi. He is a professor in international relations and he has studied many courses in bachelor's and postgraduate studies. He will talk about Chinese GCC countries in the light of developing the BRI, and shall give the speakers 15 minutes per speaker. We have 3 speakers and after lunch we are less active and we also need to leave some time for discussion. Please go ahead.
شكرا سيد.
And first of all, I would like to thank the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies for hosting this wonderful event, and especially thank Professor Kaplan and Professor Mansour for inviting me here. It is my honor to be here to share some of my personal observations and thoughts, and it seems to me that this will be the last section in this track about Sino-GCC relations. So usually it means we are more relaxed and open to change opinions and share different views. And just as like I don't agree everything that my dear chairman just mentioned, but I really thank him for providing this very interesting perspective to look at this very complicated project as the BRI we are talking about. Okay, so the topic I'm going to present today, or the original paper, the topic is the Sino-GCC relations under the developing multi-dimensional BRI. However, I will not be constrained only on the very specific aspects of this grand project, because many kind of figures you can have many other sources to find out. So I will start from talking about the transitions of the BRI, the different aspects of this project, but also move a little bit kind of beyond that, okay, to talk about some micro level thoughts about this great power competition in the digital age, and what's the role of the GCC countries within this new era, okay. So to start with, I think there has been some kind of a very important kind of knowledge about the transformation, about the different dimensions, the leaping from one level to another level in the process when developing this BRI project. So I think fundamentally speaking, in the very original design, I think the main target of this kind of a grand economic project for China is to focusing on 2 continents or 2 large areas. One is Europe, the other is Africa, because these 2 continents or these 2 areas of the world represent the different chances or different potentials for China's economic future. So China wants to have a better connection with these 2 continents. But in the process, China gradually realized that in order to reach these 2 destinations, you have to do a lot of works as the preparation. So as we can see, this kind of the focus of the BRI has been gradually more focused on the other regions, such as the Southeast Asia, such as Central Asia, and also the Middle East. So we must have some kind of understanding about this kind of transitions, about this different kind of dimensions, and also about this kind of the focus. I think from the very beginning, as we can see, the original design is to increase the trade between China and Europe and between China and Africa, and then in order to reach these 2 destinations, you try to focusing on the infrastructures, on the connectivities from China to different destinations. So China has more and more kind of like a focus to develop this kind of like the neighboring countries and all the countries along the Belt and Road Initiative, and also to put focus on these infrastructures. And also, gradually speaking, as we can see nowadays, it has some repercussions that it also has this kind of like a political connotations, as we can see nowadays. And also, we can see in the developing these BRI projects, from the early years, it is almost an entirely state-oriented project, but nowadays it turns to be more and more like a project-oriented directions, right? So in short, I think there will be some kind of like different tendencies in the foreseeable future about the new decade of the BI, because we just have one decade of the BI developments, and then I think in the new decade of the BI development, there will be more and more this tripartite cooperations. For example, the cooperations between China and the GCC countries on North Africa, on Sub-Saharan Africa, or in other areas, this type of like cooperations, and also more sophisticated regulations, because we all know that there has been some problems about the regulations and some kind of like problems in the past decade. So it might need more improvement in this regard. And also there will be kind of like a more balanced between the traditional infrastructure and also the digital infrastructures, as we can see China are now focusing on developing also in the Gulf countries, okay? So this is kind of like the general observations about the different dimensions or different directions of the BRI to my understanding. But I would like to focus more on how to better understand the BRI project from more like a macro level, because we all know that now the world is in this kind of like trying times, right? So everyone, no matter you are from the West, you are from the East, or you are in the Middle East, you are trying to figure out what is happening and what the world might lead us to, right? We can see that some scholars in the States, and they are now devised this new word as the post-Cold War, because there's no kind of like, it was pretty difficult to describe the features of our era, but it has already been so different from the period that we are familiar in the post-Cold War era. So they are having this new word as the Cold War era, right? And some scholars would say that, okay, especially for scholars to the West, they would think that the main feature of this new era is that the liberal international order is now being challenged. Okay, in China, the leaders put in a more neutral way of expression is called the profound change unseen in a century. Okay, so there are many ways to describe this kind of like the new form of the new era, but they lack some kind of like detailed observations. So to me, I want to talk a little bit about what, in essence, that makes the great power competition in the new era different from some great power competition that we are familiar with, such as the Cold War between Moscow and Washington. I think it is very interesting to witness that during the Cold War, there was the non-alignment movement, but in essence, I think most countries around the world at that time was aligned either with the US or the Soviet Union in effect, okay? However, today we can see a very intriguing, like to the opposite phenomenon, that no matter whether you are like officially speaking, you are ally of one great power, for example, the power of the ally of the United States, you are actually like from time to time to resist the pressure from such as the head of the alliance and try to maximize your interest by carrying out this strategic hedging or balancing policies. And I think this phenomenon, we can see it is to the opposite during the Cold War. And I think it is exactly due to the new feature of this digital age, new era, and the great power competitions, as we can see it. And as we can see during this kind of like the Cold War, there were many features during the Cold War, right? There has been this kind of like a nuclear deterrence, has been proxy wars, there are many kind of like features. But I think two main features that we can see here has been greatly changed. One is that during the Cold War, most great powers and many regional powers are actually adopting this ideology first policy, right? The United States and the Soviet Union, they are trying to rally different countries following their ways of marching towards the modernism. And they believe that their option is the only option for all mankind. However, nowadays, both China and the United States may think that this is not the way that we are going to rally other countries around us. We are, no matter you are from Beijing or you are from Washington, we are actually promoting more and more this kind of like a concrete, pragmatic interest to different like audience, okay? So this is the first thing. And then the second thing is about that the change from the industrial society to this marching towards these digital societies. Because during this kind of like a Cold War that we witnessed between the Soviet Union and the United States, the human society was largely in this industrial society, and all these resources for industrial society are basically consumable, non-shareable, and tangible, right? Because if I consume this barrel of oil, you cannot consume it again, right? But nowadays, as we march towards the digital times, we can see this data is maybe the most important resources for society developments. But as we can all know, data has this kind of shareabilities, right? So I think this is kind of like the macro level set very different backgrounds for the great power competitions and the ways to rally different countries. And also, these features create much larger rooms to different kind of like countries to maneuver through this kind of like great power competitions. And so we has to admit that nowadays this kind of like a great power competition is in a very asymmetric form compared to the Cold War in the 20th century. That to the United States, the challengers is not only about China. It has been so many challengers on so many different fields. And all these countries on the global level, including China, lacks comprehensive power to challenge the United States, but they have their comparative advantages in different regions or in different areas or in different fields, right? And so the actual form to carrying out this kind of like competition is very different. So as we can see that China and the United States are all exploit their comparative advantages in this great power competition, and BRI is the one that China is using its own comparative advantage to promote its status vis-a-vis the United States. And as we talk about this kind of like new features, so that means that, as I mentioned before, that it actually creates what I call the new intermediate zones. That in these intermediate zones, it's a similar concept with the other concepts like non-aligned movement. But as we can see, the non-aligned movement in the Cold War was actually fake in essence. So the intermediate zone in the Cold War was actually kind of like a fake in nature. However, in the new era, the new intermediate zones is actually performing this real regionalism, regional cooperations to increase their advantage when negotiating with both superpowers or all the superpowers, as we can see, for example, the GCC cooperations mechanisms, and also all these countries, they are real promoting this kind of like a strategic hedgings in many other in many aspects, as we can see this morning in the talks, even about this weaponry resistance, you cannot have this kind of like a situation during the Cold War that one country have this Soviet-made weapons and the US-made weapons perform in the same army, but now we can see in many Gulf countries you have the main battle equipment from the United States or NATO's, but you have some new technologies like the drones and other weapons from China, and they are trying to do it with both compatibilities, although it has some problems, but it's all moving on these ways. Okay, so I think that the Gulf is like behaving like the typical actor in this kind of like a new intermediate zone. It makes advantage of the BRI that it can make use and maximize interest in this regard. And also you try to maximize the interest when cooperating with the United States. So that leads to some kind of like a basic or preliminary conclusions of mine regarding this kind of like a concept, that I will say that in the foreseeable future, that the superpowers or the so-called superpowers will never return to the status of the superpowers that we witnessed during the Cold War. And I will guess that no matter China or the United States will largely downgrade it from the head of alliances, as we can see as the Soviet Union and the United States during the Cold War, to more or less a service provider in the future. So you are the country in the intermediate zone, they are becoming more and more like the boss to dictate the conditions that you could work with different kind of like a great powers. And then the second most important thing is about that I think, as I talked with Dr. Abdulaziz yesterday, and I think he also agreed that that actually what the GCC now does, like between China and United States, is actually promoting the world peace. It makes both Washington and Beijing to get rid of this kind of like delusions that they have enough power to directly confront each other. So I think this kind of like hedging and balancing strategy of the GCC countries as typical actors in the new intermediate zone has been play a very important role in promoting regional and world peace. So I think BRI is just one aspect to understand this very interesting asymmetric competition between great powers in our new era, but there has been many other more things need to be explored, including the exact roles of the Gulf countries in this new era. And that's my observations. Thank you all.
Thank you. شكرا. الأستاذ شي اختصر علينا المشهد في تصوري.
Mr. Shi actually was precise and concise, and he cut it short where he actually placed us in front of a very important fact which has not been discussed, where I can summarize what he said, that our region is a transit area or to Africa or Europe. Yes, it's an area, it's more than area targeted, and this raise a big question mark after, which means that if you are an area of a transit, this will result in the negative aspect of the relationship with the USA. We are not the end users or key users or end beneficiaries. We are just an area of transit. Or second challenge when he highlighted is relation to the development of the infrastructure. And this is what we have raised as one of the key risks, where one of the superpower approach you to improve your infrastructure or provide logistics. This requires commitment that you failed to fulfill. So I would like just to point to the concerns of the BRI, even Russia itself, the superpower neighbor to China, that's a partner of Shanghai, did not join the BRI all in May 2015, which means that it's a true challenge. So just imagine the strategic partner of China just recently joined the BRI 2015. Our second speaker, Dr. Imad Qaddura. He is a researcher and the head of auditing section of Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. What attracted my attention actually, one of his researches, which I will ask him to provide me with, which is very important in our current times, is the external initiatives of the security and safety of the GC. The floor is yours. You have 15 minutes.
In the name of God, most merciful, most gracious, thank you, dear attendees, and thank you, Chair, for your introduction. Just so we would have sufficient time, I will start with a phrase that I will be using in the end as well. There is a traditional wisdom phrase that says the peak of skillfulness is winning without having to go through battle. So most of our conversations today and yesterday were about if China is peaceful, will it remain peaceful? Will it turn into violent responses and reactions? This phrase that I have mentioned in the beginning is a very peaceful phrase. But it also implies that sometimes you may go through battle. So my paper discusses GCC countries and their strategic location and their economic importance. However, in the beginning in 2013, they were not on the maps, the BRI original map. It was not on that map. We had the land route that leads to Eurasia, Europe, and the maritime route, which goes through the Indian Ocean and into Europe as well. So the goal is to reach Europe. But the missing or the important link was the GCC, and they were not in the original maps, which were published in 2013. And until today, they are not included in the maps actually. And even with economic routes, these economic routes, which were published later on, GCC countries are still missing from the links that were established later on. We can observe that there are two routes. The Eurasian land route, GCC is not concerned with that, the economic route, and we have the economic route between China, Central Asia, and West Asia. This route was talked about in the documents, Chinese documents, and it said that it connects to the Arab Peninsula. But as we can see, it goes through Iran, north of Iran, and Turkey, and gets to Europe, but it does not reach the Arab Peninsula or the GCC region, the other corridor, number 6. Corridor number 6, yes, connects Kashgar in Xinjiang and eastern Turkestan. It reaches Pakistan and connects Eurasia and the Indian Ocean. This is route number 6. It seems that I can't make it appear on the screen, but anyway. The GCC countries were not included in the main routes, even though they are important. And we can see that the maritime route goes through the Red Sea, right adjacently to Saudi Arabia, which is a very important country and has a great economic and political value in the region. However, it was not included in this route. It was not mentioned at all. Not Saudi Arabia, not any other GCC countries in this initiative. But how were the GCC countries included later on? Of course, bilateral relations are there between GCC countries and China. However, for them to be included in the foreign policy, the main foreign policy that China uses with the world since 2013, how did that happen? The question, how were they included in this initiative in the first place? At the beginning, China, or in China, the routes were updated regularly to respond to the needs and the successes achieved in the beginning. China started updating their routes with the successes they have achieved, and they started connecting regional networks to their international network. The key networks is the sub network in the Gulf area. In 2014, the President Xi Jinping visited the Arab region and launched the Arab Chinese Initiative paper, and he initiated what he called the Button 321, which are the patterns of the 6 patterns of the collaboration, which China uses to connect these countries to the BRI. So if they are not in the original maps, then these are the main areas where they will be connected. In the Pyramid Summit, there is the traditional energy, and of course, this fulfills the needs of China, as we know. And on the two wings, as China calls it, on the two wings, we have infrastructure, trade, and investment, including ports, industrial cities, railways, and so on. This is a need by both parties because GCC need further development in this area, and they need also investments. And in technology, we have satellites and renewable energy, and all of these fulfill the needs of GCC countries because they always look for a big partner in the world so that they can develop their economies and their strength, relative strength in the world. So the question is why? Why does China work on integrating these countries when they were not included in the original initiative? Now, gradually, they are accounted for in the initiative. First, China is expected to consume in 2030 around 16 million barrels of oil per day and 7 billion cubic meters. In the past, it used to use 2 billion barrels only, and now they will be using 16 billion barrels. So they need the GCC countries, and they need to connect them to this initiative. They imported from GCC countries around 210 million tons of oil in 2022, 41% of its imports, international imports. The interests were growing, so trade between China and GCC countries were increasing exponentially. Since 1990, it was 1.3 million USD. In 2022, they were 303 million, so 300 times the value in 30 years. So GCC countries are important for China because they are an important resource for investment and for deposits in the Asian Investment Bank and infrastructure, which is the main channel for the BRI initiative. And the question is, why GCC countries? Here, this table summarizes the partnership between China and GCC countries. GCC countries think that the BRI represent an international promising project, and they cannot exclude themselves from this major project, despite all the claims, might they be true or not, that and that security concerns related to the BRI, but it is a realistic and a very big project, and the investment value is $4 trillion right now. So they cannot exclude themselves for geographic reasons. They were not there, so now they look for ways to have networking with the Gulf Sub Network and the Chinese international network. GCC countries have visions such as the Saudi Vision 2030, Qatar Vision 2030, UAE Vision 2030, Kuwait Vision 2035, Oman 2040. These visions are renaissance projects for local economies, and they look forward to increasing their regional and international size through these visions and developing infrastructure. China is a candidate among the candidates for collaboration, and here there is an important observation. China is different from major countries in because it has taken a very quick pathway in development. So the Gulf countries have money from their oil resources, and they can take this expressway towards growth and development. And so the GCC countries practically are in the map. Saudi Arabia has signed an agreement, a strategic partnership in 2016, a comprehensive partnership which is better than a regular partnership. Qatar signed a partnership in 2014, UAE in 2018, Kuwait strategic partnership 2018, and Oman is looking forward as my speculations, or as per my speculations of the Omani newspapers and Omani projects, they look forward to sign this strategic partnership in 2024. There are major projects of China and GCC countries, the most important of which are investment in ports, investment in industrial zones on ports such as Yanbu refinery and port. So there is networking here, and the route is not just does not just go the Red Sea simply, but there is a very important station which is the refinery and port of Yanbu. There is also LNG, Qatari LNG, which is very important, and Dr. Muhammad talked about it yesterday. We have the ports of Dubai, which serve China because they have 20 ports around the world which are affiliated with it. China invested in Khalifa port in Abu Dhabi with $10 million, and Al Shamal, the industrial city, and the Great Mubarak port in Kuwait. So major projects that we have here. Just give me 4 minutes. I will conclude within 4 minutes. You have 2 minutes. Okay, 2 minutes. So the discussion, there is always talks from the Chinese that they have penetrated the international relationship which were prevalent for 100 years, which is the political reality. Now China has come up with what is so called by the president a community of interests, i.e. a community where everyone is winning, everyone dealing with China wins, and regardless of the Western realistic vision, the vision that China sees is that instead of adversaries, we could have partnerships, interests for everyone, a win-win situation instead of the Western equation. That is their vision. But what I see in reality and what we see in reality, the Chinese approach is very close to it's a geopolitical approach, even though they reject this phrase, but it's a geopolitical approach. China, in its location, is connected to Eurasia by land and is connected to Europe. Europe is very sensitive, and we can see that historically they are afraid of the Orient threat from the Huns, Mughals, Turks, and after all of that we have Russia. And now we have the clash in Ukraine to stop the perceived threat of the Orient. Now, China is coming peacefully from the Orient, and they have indeed penetrated Europe and penetrated Eurasia and reached the center of Europe. Into half of the European countries signed agreements with China on the BRI, and the value of the trade exchange between China and Europe is 904 trillion USD. So the irony is that the Europeans themselves, who are against China and consider it a great threat, they talked about it as a challenge. The real challenge is the US, actually. The US and the UK consider that any force that penetrates Europe and has a great weight within Europe will be an adversary to the US in international domination. Thank you.
I would like to thank you. You have presented so many details, information, in which you have actually intersect with what Mr. Shi said, that Europe is basically targeted. We are a transit countries, but if you look at the track number 6, which in the Gwadar port, there's the green line, or the land actually crossing, which has been developed with some Chinese countries that will link the Red Sea, and this is one of the potential routes that you have discussed. Our last speaker, Dr. Yusuf Al-Blushi, he's an economist, so that we are looking forward to more profound economic readings, where they have more than 20 years of academic and economic experience in different economic institutions, and he played a major role in Oman Vision 2040, in which he will be discussing the Gulf China nations from a strategic perspective. You have 20 minutes. The floor is yours, please.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. في البداية بأمانة نشكر المركز.
First of all, I'd like to thank the ACRPS. I'd like to thank you for inviting us and providing such important platform to discuss these key topics. In my paper, I try to answer a number of questions. Maybe if my paper presented in the first session might be a new question, but since I'm the last presenter, most of these questions have been actually answered, where I will mainly focus in Oman, since I am more experienced in Oman's economy. First question, why China? Why everybody talks about China as significance and regarding its strategic position and the relation between Oman and China and Gulf and China relations. What are the key pillars of this kind of close ties with China? As for China, we all agree that China is the second major super and economic power. China has the biggest hard currency reserve, more than 3 trillion of its financial reserve, and China is the biggest exporter and importer. The GDP is growing constantly, and what China is experiencing never been experienced by any other country, where it made more than 10% economic growth over many years. And this should be highlighted. This is a success story, the Chinese experience. And one of the key reasons for this close ties and rapprochement
الاستفادة من هكذا
between China and Oman that can serve as a good example, a role model. This we will see that the GCC over the last 10 years, with the GCC started to diversify our economy. We are no longer trying to heavily rely on oil and gas, where oil and gas at early stages was used to build infrastructure or the revenues generated from oil and gas were spent on salaries, whereas the last 10 years we started to witness a great improvement in managing GCC economies and try to step out from one source of income, which is selling oil and gas, and try to create another alternative. And the figures and numbers are very alarming, actually, and very big regarding the amount of money that's been leaving the country worldwide. And many of these, most of the money has been went or go to China. And this model that's made us rethink and reconsider our economic approach, and where we can start to be countries that produce. And China actually made it by using different means that became, we can call China the global workshop. And the GCC looking forward to benefiting from this experience. Of course, the relations between GCC and China goes back in years, maybe some said thousands, hundreds of years, but according to a review of literature, it shows that we have the sea routes and there's land routes. We call it incense and silk roads, and the trade exchange between GCC and China reached its peak for more than 200 billion, and this is a very big figure. Oman is one of the first countries that started to improve its ties to China, and this is due to the fact that Oman was a commercial naval empire, and Oman one of the destinations for China, where the trade exchange grown from 10,000 to 40 billion. But what matters, the quality of this growth. Is it to the best or to the advantage of Oman's economy, or just to the advantage of China's economy? It's just a matter of exporting oil and gas and import everything from China. So, as I said, that there was a great leap made regarding trade exchange, where Oman was the very first country that dispatched ambassador to China. And the first 7 voyages, as Dr. Hatem mentioned, 4 of these were actually were for Oman, target Oman. On the other hand, I can say that at the trade level, there's a big trade exchange that's growing, but this is we're talking about investment. We are looking forward direct for investment because still there isn't that we have received so many promises and pledges from China that saying that they will invest in the Dogom as a strategic location, but so far these pledges have not been actually fulfilled. Oman was about to fall in this debt trap. China was very generous when the rating of Oman, according to national rating organization, increased, and China was willing to offer us all these funds. She said, "You don't pay it in an installment; you can pay it once as a pellet." And thankfully, Oman managed to settle the biggest amount of its debts. The size of the DIR, direct investment, came from Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. Whereas in Oman, we hear so many words, but these words have not been transferred into deeds. But the question, what are the basis or the rationale for GCC China rapprochement of these close ties? I will address this matter from economic aspect because we are here in GCC, we're looking for geopolitical in order to create job opportunities that would result in the improvement in our economy and changing the structure of economy. Whereas China is looking for something else. China is looking for geopolitical rapprochement. That's why we need to pay attention to this particular issue to ensure that once we start negotiation with China or building economic partnership, it should be for the benefit of our part of the world, for this region. I have addressed 7 key considerations for this rapprochement. The first is the receding role of USA in this region, or the retracted. At the same time, these GCC countries have security concerns, and the people started to say that why not we enter into agreement with China, India, Russia that might benefit this region if they have been actually made in a very good way. Same time, there are a lot of repercussions or applications of this strategic partnership with China. The key pillar of my study is the direct foreign investment, and it's important as a tool to change the structure of countries' economies due to the benefits that emanate from this direct investment, including technology, knowledge, access to markets. So far, the Chinese investments lack these 5 key components. So I believe this rapprochement should take into account that investment or spillover should be done in a systematic manner to ensure that our companies can compete with their global counterparts. So, of course, these Chinese companies, if they might come to this part of the world, at the same time, they will not benefit our countries. At the same time, the rhetoric of the Chinese politician that welfare of everybody and win-win for all, we were living in a thriving world, but we are looking for more than words. Last point is as I said before, there's regarding the political stances and political at the expense of the economic aspect. The GCC, we have very short period of time, short timeline to change our economy and transfer into sustainable economy. We know oil eventually will receded and will depleted. Maybe in the future there will be a drop in demand. That's why the GCC countries should pay attention that this economic exchange is the key factor. Thank you.
شكرا لك حقيقة يعني
Actually, I have noted down noted down from what you said that for those who review the strategic alliances of China with other countries, we see that the partners are acting as tools to complement the Chinese economic projects that are no more than tools. So I'll open the floor for questions, and please make your intervention precise and concise. Introduce yourself first. Samir Shemaile, I'm a researcher of the GCC China Relationship. I'd like to thank Dr. Ahmad for this informed, outstanding paper regarding the BRI, where he focused on the BRI as a tool or mechanism of promoting geostrategic or geopolitical with this region. But if we want to follow a scientific methodology, we need to consider this one of the tools of China towards its Middle East. At the same time, we see there's the GCC China talks or dialogues, Arab-China dialogues, where the GCC countries expressed their desire to sign the free zone agreement. All these tools requires a more profound research or study about the mechanisms adopted by China in its relation with the GCC. Another point raised by Dr.
That a point that we need to indicate, China is still hesitant for the GCC to be its strategic option in relationships in the Gulf area. It still trusts Iran as a partner strategically, even though the trade relationships with Iran might be 1/3 of those with the GCC. But it still has geographic contact and involvement in the US-Irani relationships. And I think China or Iran will be the first option for China compared to the GCC countries for now. So we heard about the Chinese death trap. But nobody mentioned Sri Lanka. He turned off the microphone. Sorry, I cannot hear him. So I need examples other than Sri Lanka. Is it similar to the Greek debt with the Germans and how they exploited that? Thank you. We go back to the right side. Go ahead, please. Home from Oman. In the name of God, merciful, most gracious, peace be upon you. Abdullah Al-Ghilani. In such meetings, we hope to come up with great outputs and strategic results. However, many sessions are all about verbose presentations and reformulating the same words that we already know. So in the context of talking about GCC China relationships, I would like to ask some questions, not necessarily looking for an answer, but questions to broaden our horizons and think about these things. Is there a unified GCC bloc that has unified or standardized the trends? Is there agreement between such GCC block, six state block on the understanding of the regional sea? And I think it is this element is absent, and so it is not objective to talk about Chinese GCC relations, because we do not have one standard GCC block that agrees on all of these concepts. And this, of course, includes all files, not just relations with China, but everything. There are variations and great differences, discrepancies among these countries. Another thing, in all the conversations that we had about Gulf Chinese relations, there is one fixture that is always repeating itself, which is the US factor. The USA, in some facet, is present in all of these conversations. We do not talk about the US GCC relationship. What is the nature of this relationship, and how much has the US penetrated the GCC structures? On the other hand, do the GCC states, as individuals or as a group, do they have the absolute liberty to choose between or have any type of control in these relationship patterns and their relationship and the nature of their relationship with the US and China and EU, Russia, Iran, and so on? Do the Gulf states have absolute liberty in these options? So the nature of the relationship between the US, which is present in all of these conversations and all of these deliberations, this needs to be highlighted and understand what is our relationship as a bloc and as the Gulf region with the US. And on the other hand, how much can the US hinder the relationship with China? Do we have the liberty to choose the nature of our relationship with China? Or does the US have the capability with some sort of tools to hinder such relationship and regulate its routes? One final point, Dr. Majid, please. I believe, as per my estimation, that in the foreseen future, China can be a trade partner but not a strategic partner, because a strategic partnership has political dimensions, security dimensions, and not just trade exchange. Sometimes asking questions more valuable than looking for the answer, really. Imad Mansour, Dr. Imad and Dr. Youssef, in 2016, the center held, with Dr. Marwan, who was here, held a conference on Arabs and China. And in the end of the conference, me and my colleague Muhammad Deiri had a workshop on what do Arabs want from China and what does China want from Arab. I believe it was really successful. That was in 2016, and it was preceded by some workshops that I led in the University of Qatar. So the idea is we had the image of a Shekhwan in 2016, and we asked the Chinese, why were we excluded? I consider myself from the Gulf, sorry about that, but this is what we asked. And where is the region from your calculations? And the response was, this is an initiative, so the Gulf states should come to the table and say, this is what we want. We want development, we want training, we want exchange. We trained indeed some staff in the University of Qatar on techniques and so on. So the idea that there is a non-clear agenda is positive for GCC countries, actually, and we may not expect from a great country or a major country to have all the answers. So the answer is yes. What do the governments want specifically for their developments in the GCC? So no, stick to Arabic, please, because there is a translation. Many of what we talked about was about relationships and the intervention of the US relationships with China. The first presumption was that there is a role by the US. The second hypothesis is that there is stability in ruling and community in China. So my question is, with the changing of individuals, of course individuals will change due to reasons, due to death, due to anything. Do you believe that there is stability in the ideologies that are behind the interactive relationship of China with other international parties? Is there stability and an ideology that is approved by individuals in China in decision making? Because this is a post Cold War and the post colonialism actually. And these ideas and their holders are those who will be with us in dealing with these things in the next years. Thank you, Dr. Muhammad. Thank
من الأمس إلى اليوم ونحن نردد نفس النغمة لكن
As you know, the GCC are very small countries compared with the superpowers. Who is the protector of these small countries, small in size, and their strategic and the bilateral agreement or strategic agreement or economic or security related agreements? Who will protect me eventually? Do I have the capacity as a small size country to protect myself first? Secondly, these small size countries, can they create blocks to create a power that can confront others? These questions not for you, they are just for the future. Are there a political will to do the leaders of the GC have the political will? This part of the world that attracts people all over the world. Who will protect us over the next 10 or 15 years? We are a targeted nation. Tell us how we get from this trap. How can we get out from this impasse? We want to come up with a statement stipulating that the GCC should not be disintegrated, and should be united. We don't want to end up like refugees, that nobody else will help us.
دكتور إن شاء الله. طيب أستاذ كريم تفضل معلش لأنه لا أبشر لا أبشر طال عمرك إن شاء الله يأتي لك الدور.
Yes, I'll give it.
بالمناسبة في ختام الجلسة
And we will have another session, a close session with Dr. Marwan after we finish this session. اسمي سام إسلاف عيد. I work for the center. I have a question, Dr. Imad and Dr. Shi as well. Regarding the military cooperation, Dr. Imad actually presented 6 areas of collaboration between China and GCC that do not include anything has related to military collaboration. As you know, the GCC countries are one of the top countries regarding importing arms and weaponry, but nobody talk about this military collaboration with China. Whereas African countries, they follow a variety of strategies. They don't follow one strategy. Even the African Collaboration Organization do not control the policies of African countries. Each African country follow different approach. That's why China interact with each country individually. We talk about Africa, but what about the military collaboration between the African countries and China? I am the political economics professor of the political institution. Mr. Shi, I have a question to you. The main targeted of the BRI is European continent, as Dr. Ahmad said, the size of trade exchange is 790 billion US dollars. Now the European countries are expressing a kind of no longer interested in agreement with China. Even the Italian Prime Minister in China said that the BRI for us as European has not achieved the required achievements. That's why now the Parliament of Italy is considering leaving this agreement, because in March it's expected that this agreement will be renewed automatically. That's why I believe Italy will be the first European country to pull out from the BRI. How China can act regarding this behavior of Italy that will pull out from the BRI? From my personal experience, the American and British pressure will destroy the BRI, either like it or not. What's the fate of other projects and initiatives that under the BRI? Dr. Youssef, you mentioned a figure that made me surprised. You said that the investment of China is 12.5 billion US dollars, which is not correct. This is inaccurate figure. What's the cause of the drop of the direct foreign investment in Oman? What's the reason for this drop of China's direct investment or direct foreign investment, DFI? I'd like to thank you, Dr. Majid. I'd like to thank you for inviting us to this very important session. I will cut it short. The Secretary General of the United Nations, during the opening of the BRI, of the international collaboration, where he acknowledged the efforts of China to establish this initiative that represent progress in renewable energy, as China invests in more than 152 countries in Europe, Asia, and Africa, and Latin America. The question now, where are we in the GCC of progress made by China from the Chinese and the GCC perspective? I have two questions. Jahad Mili.
سؤالي للدكتور يوسف تحدث عن حجم
So you talked about economic collaboration with between GCC and China, and you talked about numbers of trillions. Regardless of the numbers, if we are to expand the circle and talked about Arab-Chinese cooperation or Islamic-Chinese cooperation, how can we invest in this relationship for defending the causes of the Ummah that China can be a party of? We appreciate the Chinese stance on the Palestinian cause. It is a good stance and we respect it, but there are other causes that we hope for China to change, which is Eastern Turkestan, a region which is under full siege, and the Rohingya minority in Myanmar, where they can serve the causes of our Islamic Ummah. Also, Dr. Shi, please, if you can answer these questions, please go ahead. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I have a comment on the paper of Mr. Shi. Mr. Shi has said in the beginning of his paper that the Gulf does not have to have the ideological traits in their relationships with the US, with the China, and so on. How did you get to this output, and how can the Gulf use its ideology in its international relations? Mr. Youssef. Mr. Youssef, you have talked about interesting things. Who is important to the other? Is China important for the GCC or is the GCC important for China? Last question is for Dr. Imad. You mentioned an important point that the concept of public relations has evolved and it is not the same anymore. I mean, international relations between countries. And now the concept is that it is a mutual interest. And this has long been there, a present concept in the Western concepts as well. But now we have more awareness that the major countries used to exploit and eat the smaller countries. But now the smaller countries have more awareness, they have ideologies, they have scholars, they have the ability to confront these forces. And so for you to be my partner, it needs to be a win-win situation. Let us start with Dr. Youssef, but please be quick because we are out of time. For the point, don't go into details, just give us a summary of everything. For China, China is not absolute evil or absolute good. Understanding China from the inside, understanding its culture is vital for dealing with it. But for China, the Gulf is a main source of energy which China needs, and China considers the Gulf market is very important. And for the GCC, they are all in transitional phases. They want to transition into sustainable economies. They need to manufacture and export things. And so the win-win situation that you talked about is the correct formula with China or with any other party for that matter.
لكن
We have received so many questions. Actually, I could have only presented the half of my presentation. The second half will be sent through email. So this schedule or this table responds to most of your questions. That's why I try to directly answer your questions. China, Dr. Samir Shamal, actually China has two alternatives, either Iran or GCC. Maybe they are reluctant either go for China's side or GCC. It's not China's fault. China, when it's $300 billion with the GCC, with Iran $400 billion over 25 years in the form of investment. So whose fault is it? It's not the fault of China. It's the fault of the countries, the other countries, those countries, the GCC countries actually. So the GCC should work hard, and this is an answer to Dr. Misfer's comment. What we should do, who would protect us? Honestly, the governments of the GCC are the responsible. They are responsible that assign researchers, experts to design strategies to ensure a balanced interaction with Iran and China. Just regarding the trap debt, we heard it repeatedly talk about. Italy was an example for Italy. In 2019, Italy started the partnership where Italy joined the BRI, hoping that Italy will export more to China, whereas what happened? Yes, it increased from 13 billion to 18 billion, but China from 33 billion to 50 billion exports to Italy. That's why the Parliament of Italy actually criticized and protested against this partnership. This is the critical situation when the project of China in one country reached a critical situation if it result in political influence due to the size of this trade. That's why during to this growing, Italy started to feel that this increase of trade will turn into political influence and intervention. That's why Italy will be. That's why there are Western pressure on Italy to pull out from the BRI. Sri Lanka also. Last example is Djibouti. Djibouti, 20% of its GDP just to save the debts of China, to pay the debts. Even the figures that are presented are taken from Western references and resources. It's a propaganda, but it is reality. There is a current problem of debts. But the Western resources, they exaggerate regarding dumbing countries with Chinese debts. After this table, they're supposed to present another table about the response of Western countries to China and to what extent this apply to GCC. And last is the propaganda of the debt trap. This apply to the GCC as the economic corridor can another aspect of this economic benefits. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much for all the questions.
أود أن أشكركم على كل هذه الأسئلة. أعرف أن رئيس الجلسة يبدو أنه متعجل لرفع الجلسة بسبب ضيق الوقت.
So for the ending on time of our section. So I just there are both all very interesting questions. I'm more than happy to discuss with each of you regarding ideology about the security cooperation on many aspects. I just like to point out, following Professor Ahmad's answers about my observations about Italy's case, okay? Because I was in Italy in 2019, and I was there again this summer in 2023. And then it was very, very interesting to observe this kind of twists and ups and downs, twists and turns of China's promoting the BRI with this kind of so-called G7 developed countries. I think very important is that China has some kind of make some kind of a misstep in dealing with Italy, including when trying to forestalling to avoid Italy from withdrawing from the BRI initiative. From the source that I know, that China may overly done something that has the anti-effect that push the Italy even more kind of further. So I think China, in promoting the BRI, has been far from perfect. It makes mistakes, like the United States also make all kinds of mistakes. So this is kind of one general observation. And the second one is that Italy is a relatively special case compared to maybe the GCC countries. It is highly polarized domestically. Okay, so all this kind of no matter you want to cooperate with China or disentangled or decoupled from China, they all have huge amount of supporters within Italy case. So this is, I think, might not be that kind of suitable to directly compare to many other countries, including some GCC countries. And the third one is that as something that kind of inspire me to raise this kind of a great power competition, and then the middle countries and smaller countries can make use of the great power competition, is that when I was in Italy 2019, when I visited their foreign ministries, with some other China experts, both from China and outside China, but mainly pro-China in stance. When we are on the second floor of the Italian foreign ministry, there's a huge US Congress delegations on the first floor. And we are just trying to giving different kind of opinions to the same countries. And then Italy is trying to make use of this kind of opportunities. But I think no matter what the great countries offer is one thing, but how the countries develop itself is another. With due respect, I think Italy has met some serious problems with its industrial upgrade, and then has created many other issues. So I think that by making maximum use of the great competition, all the countries need to think clearly how to better develop its main industry so could better survive in this new era. Yeah.
Thank you. حقيقة شكرا للمتحدثين بحكم أن جلستنا هي
Thank you. This was the last session in the China-GCC relations. Allow me to conclude with quick points. Quarter of a month. We cannot deem the relations with China and security and economy without having awareness and thinking of the spaces such as Shanghai, BRI, BRICS Alliance. And we need a comprehensive perception of the relation with China. We need an objective entrance to be aware of the Chinese threats. First, China and the exterior versus the interior or in-depth position, its presence in high seas, its penetration of Central Asia, and its presence in Africa. And this includes the pathways affecting Arab-Chinese relations in the Sea of China, and the pathway of BRI and Chinese powers and the security threats that poses, and also the Chinese relations with countries in Central Asia, which has its negative, its positive and adverse implications. Of course, we were happy yesterday and today to have these deliberations and to ask questions. Dr. Abdullah, as you said, sometimes questions are more important than answers. Thank you, everyone. Dr. Marwan shall conclude this session and our meetings. Thank you very much, Dr. Majid, for chairing this session. Before I conclude, and thank all speakers and participants for their enriching deliberations throughout 2 days. It would be of benefit to remind you of the main 2 points in relation to the GCC Chinese relations and the function of this forum in general. At the Arab Center, of course, as indicated in its title, we have 12 nationalities in this room, and so our main goal is to follow the issues, Arab, regional, and international, that affect our region. So the GCC Chinese relations and Arab Chinese relation is a topic that took our attention, and as my colleague said, we had another conference 7 or 8 years recently, and throughout years, as you have said, we talked about US and Arab relations, and we have a conference on that some years ago, and we always in this forum issue all these outputs in a booklet, because we want this in academic forum, not just political. Our main goal is to have academic deliberations that give great margin to the participants to express their opinions transparently and liberally, and we provide recommendations to decision makers, or we try to do that. Even if we don't do that, we have influence. We have influence on the elites that attend and discuss these things, and each one of you have your presence on social media, and you have your own followers. And I myself benefited a great deal from the discussions on in these 2 days and in the public opinion, because we issue many studies and articles, newspaper articles, and other pieces in journals and so on. where we express the various perspectives, and this reflects in the end on the decision makers indirectly, because decision makers shouldn't be accessed in one way only. Sometimes there are other indirect ways. So GCC Chinese relations, this topic is on our agenda. It imposed itself on all of us because there are developments, and we believe that the world is in ever changing dynamic, and such as the US Gulf relations that have changed, and we discussed them years ago. We have changes with the GCC Chinese relations. Of course, the US GCC relations took a step back due to the belief prevalent for a while that GCC is no longer of interest to US because the US produces oil, and it is the largest producer of oil and gas right now, and it exceeds Saudi Arabia and Russia, and Dr. Mustafa surely has the numbers on that. And for the Americans, Israel at some point is capable of defending itself, and it had no longer any need because there was normalization with countries, and so there were no aggression around Israel. It was capable of protecting itself, and there is no Soviet Union. This was the Holy Trinity during the Cold War, as they say. So the strategic situation in the Gulf region changed. And Dr. Shaji yesterday talked about the shock that happened as response to the U.S. Reaction to the attack on Saudi Arabia. And I think that was natural because the US no longer has interests in the region. And now the US is surprised. Why are we moving towards China? This was the main reason that put this topic on our agenda, because yesterday, after trying to marginalize the region in media and in academic circles as if it has no longer interest for the US, we organized also two forums on the Ukrainian war because we had great influence, even though we were not directly related. But this put the region back into the circle of attention of US because they needed oil and gas. They depended on Russia previously, and they said, let's forget about the GCC. They are no longer important. Let's take all the oil from Russia. And Germany was leading this in Europe. Suddenly, Russia is invading Germany. Everything changed, and the Russian pipelines are no longer giving energy to Europe, and this dependency was broken, and they came back to the Gulf. And so, what imposed this topic on our table again is what happened last year in Saudi Arabia, saying that they are dealing with Saudi Arabia as a shunned state. They stopped importing arms to Saudi Arabia, and there was the report, the Khashoggi report, and the 9/11 report, and so on. Suddenly, they visited Saudi Arabia, and it was followed by the Gulf US Summit, which was held in July 2022. The Chinese Gulf Summit was in December, and here we have competition. Of course, I respect all perspectives, but I think that the Gulf region is the most important region in the world right now. All the competition is around this region. There is great conflict between the Americans and the Chinese on this region, and China needs this region, and the region needs China because China is our market in oil and gas, and we are the main source for them. This is a reciprocal need, and so this puts us within the heart of this conflict. And so the GCC region is the swing, and in the swing, and I believe that the swing will be inclining towards the Chinese. And so this, I do not believe that I'm exaggerating in any way. I always discuss this with Dr. Misfer, and this requires the GCC region to have a standardized stance and to understand their weight and their effect and influence and work based on that. Because today we are capable of affecting what is happening in Palestine more than we think. We have the capability of affecting international balances of power more than we think. So today and for years to come, will be important, because this region used to be an arena of conflict between the US and Soviet Union, and the last used to say, and we have the two seas, the seas of oil and the sea of Islam. And so we had Saudi Arabia, which pumped additional quantities of oil, and the prices crashed in 86, and then after that the Soviet Union collapsed. And so we still have that important that we had during the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the US. All of that pushed us to have this topic on our agenda. As we said, our main goal is to discuss these subjects that concern us in the region. We want to discuss them, we want to talk about them, and to exchange opinions on them. And I believe this is what we have done throughout the 2 days. As for the influence is gradual and slow, but surely it will happen. I think that decision makers are well aware of the importance of the changes that are happening on the regional and international scenes. And next year we will be choosing a topic. Of course, the topics choose themselves. We do not choose them. Something might happen in the region or in the world, and we feel like it should be discussed, such as it's the same case with any think tank or center around the world. It depends on the developments, and they impose themselves on our agendas, and this is what we always aspire to do. Mainly, our goals are to serve our Arab interests, and this is what I wanted to mention in the conclusion of this forum. Once again, I would like to thank everyone for their participation, their attendance, and your enriching participations. We are happy to meet all of you, and this is like an annual date. We are always meeting this date, and we will be meeting every year on the 1st of December. So see you next year. Be well, and I hope we will meet in better circumstances. Thank you.